Hey guys, tonight we're stepping way back to a time when the world, as you knew it, was about to get a serious geographical facelift, whether you realized it or not. Imagine for a moment you're standing on the creaking deck of a tiny wooden ship, the salty spray stinging your face, the wind whipping through your hair, and the endless, terrifying expanse of the Atlantic stretching out before you. There's nothing but horizon, day after day, week after week. You're out there a speck, on a vast blue canvas, convinced you're on a shortcut to paradise, or at least to the spice markets of the East. You're chasing a dream, a wild, audacious gamble, and you have absolutely no idea that what you're actually doing is sailing straight into one of history's biggest, most magnificent blunders. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Most people didn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And seriously, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always wild to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the gentle sway of the ship, a constant hypnotic rhythm that becomes your entire world. Days blend into nights marked only by the shifting sun and the distant, unchanging stars. You've packed your bags, said your tearful goodbyes, and set off with a head full of maps. Maps, mind you, that are, to put it mildly, works of creative fiction. You, like everyone else on board, believe you are on a direct course to the Indies, to the fabled riches of Shipangu, which you know today as Japan, and Cathay, which we call China. The plan? Your plan is brilliantly simple. Sail west. Avoid the long, perilous journey around Africa that the Portuguese are so fond of. And voila, you're in Asia, ready to fill your coffers with gold silks and the kind of spices that would make your medieval bland diet actually taste like something. Think of it as the ultimate cross-country road trip, only instead of a car, you have a glorified bathtub, and instead of Google Maps, you have, well, let's just say your navigation system is based on a lot of hope and a generous dose of wishful thinking. You've probably heard stories about this journey, fragments picked up in school, or from documentaries, but tonight, you're not just hearing about it, you're living it. You're feeling the hard deck beneath your worn boots, smelling the mixture of tar sweat and sea air, and tasting the perpetually damp hardtack biscuit that's become your staple. Your mind is fixed on the East, a land of unimaginable wealth, shimmering cities, and exotic wonders. You picture vast markets overflowing with pepper, cinnamon, and clove spices so valuable they were literally worth their weight in gold back home. This wasn't just about making a living. This was about becoming monumentally, historically rich. And if you could also spread the good word of your God along the way, well, that was just a bonus, a little spiritual side hustle to go along with your grand mercantile ambitions. It's like hitting two birds with one very wobbly wind-powered stone. But here's the kicker. The magnificent irony of your grand adventure. You have no concept, no inkling whatsoever, that between your starting point in Europe and your imagined destination in Asia lies an entire colossal unexplored continent. An entire landmass teeming with diverse cultures, unique flora and fauna, and unimaginable resources is completely absent from your mental map of the world. It's as if you're planning a trip from London to Beijing, but your map somehow missed the entire landmass of Russia, leaving a big blue empty space where it should be. You're not just a little off course. You're operating under a fundamental continent-sized misapprehension. Historians still argue whether anyone in Europe truly had any prior knowledge of these lands. But for you, right now, they simply don't exist. You are sailing into the great unknown, not for the sake of discovery in the modern sense, but in the stubborn belief you are merely finding a better, faster way to a known destination. You can almost hear the whispered conversations among the crew, the quiet anxieties about provisions, the fear of the unknown, but you push it all aside. Your conviction is ironclad. You are Columbus, and your vision is clear even if it's spectacularly wrong. You are not searching for a new world. You are searching for a better route to the old one. The idea of stumbling upon something entirely novel, something that would fundamentally reshape humanity's understanding of the planet, is simply beyond your comprehension. It's a journey born of ambition, flawed geography, and a touch of divine certainty, a potent cocktail that will forever alter the course of human history. You are truly convinced that any day now you will spot the familiar shores of Asia, the golden pagodas, the bustling ports, and the smiling faces of merchants eager to trade. The irony, of course, is that the land you are about to discover is far older, far richer in human history than anything you've ever known. You're out there floating on the vast, unsettling expanse of the ocean, and a peculiar thought might occasionally drift through your mind, perhaps during a particularly rough squall or a night watch under an impossibly starry sky. What if you just fall off the edge? You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The tales of sea monsters lurking in the abyssal depths, ready to swallow ships whole, or perhaps the ultimate peril, the edge of the world itself. You might even recall vivid drawings on ancient maps depicting terrifying creatures at the supposed ends of the earth, their gaping jaws ready to devour the unwary sailor. These are the superstitions that cling to you, the fear of the unknown made tangible. But here's the kicker, the bit that always gets a little chuckle out of modern audiences despite popular myth. You, the average person in the 15th century, and certainly the educated elite, did not believe the earth was flat. I know. It's a persistent little rumor, isn't it? The idea that Christopher Columbus was some lone visionary who bravely set out to prove the world was round, defying a superstitious populace convinced of a cosmic pancake. It makes for a good story, a narrative of scientific triumph over ignorant dogma. But the truth, as it often is a bit more nuanced and frankly a lot less dramatic. From the time of ancient Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Aristotle, the concept of a spherical earth was well established among learned individuals. Eratosthenes, way back in the 3rd century BCE, even managed to calculate the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy using little more than shadows and geometry. So when you look at the horizon from your ship, you understand intellectually at least that you're looking at a curve, not a precipice. The sun rises and sets at different times. Ships disappear hull first over the horizon. These observations were common knowledge, tangible proof of a round world. The real debate, the actual point of contention that made your journey seem utterly bonkers to many of your contemporaries, wasn't about the Earth's shape, but its size. That's where you as Columbus and your grand calculations ran into trouble. You were relying on a map and calculations by a Florentine cosmographer named Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli, who had, let's say, a rather optimistic view of the Earth's circumference. He significantly underestimated the distance from Europe west to Asia. Think of it like this. You're told it's a quick hop across the street to the corner store. But in reality, it's a marathon. You believed the distance was manageable a few thousand miles across the ocean, which for a 15th century sailing vessel was still a terrifying prospect, but theoretically achievable. Your critics, the learned scholars of the time, weren't scoffing at your belief in a round Earth. They were scoffing at your belief that you could pack enough hardtack and fresh water to actually reach Asia by sailing west, given the true, much larger circumference. They understood the world was a ball. They just knew it was a much, much bigger ball than you gave it credit for. So while the idea of a flat Earth provides a convenient villain for the narrative of Columbus's journey, it's largely a myth perpetuated much later, particularly in the 19th century, to highlight the perceived progress of science over religious dogma. It's a good campfire story, but not historically accurate. The fear wasn't falling off. The fear was starvation and thirst in the middle of an impossibly vast, empty ocean. Your sailors, while perhaps not all as educated as you, certainly understood the concept of the curve. They'd seen ships disappear over the horizon. They knew how the mast was the last thing to vanish. It's a quirky tidbit of history, isn't it? How a widespread, modern misconception can totally overshadow the actual, very real anxieties of the time. The true courage, then, wasn't in defying flat earthers, but in embarking on a voyage that stretched the known limits of endurance and navigation to their absolute breaking point, based on what many believed were fundamentally flawed calculations of distance. You were in essence making a bet against the prevailing scientific consensus of your day, not on the shape of the Earth, but on its scale. And that bet was so risky, so incredibly audacious, that it's no wonder you struggled for years to get funding. Imagine trying to convince investors today to back a project that everyone in the know says is mathematically impossible, given current technology. That was your sales pitch, more or less. Historians still argue whether you genuinely believed your own flawed calculations, or if you deliberately downplayed the distance to make the voyage seem more feasible to potential patrons. Either way, you were betting big on a geographical gamble. The constant rocking of the ship, the endless horizon, the sun arcing overhead in an undeniable sphere, all subtly reinforce the spherical nature of your world. No, the fear wasn't of tumbling into a cosmic abyss. It was of becoming lost adrift, or simply succumbing to the vast indifferent power of the ocean, thousands of miles from any land, with your supplies dwindling and hope fading faster than a sunset over the Atlantic. You, and indeed most of your contemporary sailors and navigators, weren't sailing into a theoretical void completely ignorant of what lay beyond the familiar shores of Europe. On the contrary, the seas, especially the Atlantic, were already well traveled by the time you set sail. The Portuguese, your rivals, and often your teachers in the art of exploration, had been pushing the boundaries of known geography for decades, slowly but surely extending the reach of European influence. While you were busy dreaming of a westward shortcut, they were meticulously charting the coast of Africa inch by agonizing inch southwards, with the ultimate goal of rounding its tip and reaching the lucrative markets of the East. This was the mainstream, established, and arguably more sensible approach to accessing the riches of Asia. You see, for decades leading up to your grand departure, the Portuguese had been a maritime powerhouse. Prince Henry the Navigator, though he rarely sailed himself, had established a veritable school of navigation and cartography in Sagres, fostering an environment of innovation and discovery. They weren't just blindly sailing. They were developing new ship designs like the caravel, which was faster and more maneuverable, and refining navigational instruments like the astrolabe and quadrant, allowing sailors to determine their latitude with greater accuracy. They were pushing further and further down the African coast, establishing trading posts, and slowly unraveling the mysteries of the continent. By the time you were pitching your westward idea, they had already rounded the formidable Cape Bojador, long considered a psychological and physical barrier, and were well on their way. Bartolomeu Diaz, for instance, had successfully rounded the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, in 1488, just a few years before you finally got your ships. This was a monumental achievement, proving that a sea route to Asia via Africa was indeed possible. So while your vision was audacious, it wasn't born in a vacuum of ignorance. In fact, your very ideas were often seen as a direct challenge to the hard-won empirical knowledge accumulated by the Portuguese. They were methodical. You, by comparison, seemed almost reckless in your certainty. They had proven concepts. You had a grand theory based on what many considered faulty math. It's like everyone else is painstakingly building a bridge, and you decide you can just jump across the chasm because you feel like it's closer than it looks. The Portuguese voyages had already dispelled numerous myths about the Atlantic. They had ventured into the Sea of Darkness and returned. They had encountered new peoples, new lands, and new challenges, slowly expanding the European understanding of the world. They had even made forays into the Atlantic, discovering and settling islands like Madeira, the Azores, and the Cape Verde Islands. These were not just random wanderings. They were strategic explorations aimed at securing trade routes, resources, and influence. This mainstream historical fact is crucial to understanding the context of your journey. You weren't operating in a world where the ocean was an unblemished blank slate, but rather one where other nations were already writing their names upon it, albeit in a different direction. One quirky tidbit from this era: the Portuguese, when exploring the African coast, often carried convicted criminals on board, known as degradados. These poor souls were literally used as human guinea pigs sent ashore in potentially hostile territories to test the waters, both literally and figuratively. If they survived, great; if not, well, less paperwork. It's a rather grim reminder of the expendable nature of human life on these perilous voyages, a sort of real-life, involuntary beta testing program for new lands. It certainly adds a layer of dark humor to the age of exploration, doesn't it? All right, Jenkins, your turn to see if the locals are friendly, or if they prefer a side of human with their dinner. Historians still argue whether you as Columbus genuinely underestimated the Earth's circumference, or if it was a calculated gamble, a deliberate manipulation of figures to make your proposal more appealing to monarchs desperate for a new trade route. Did you truly believe Toscanelli's faulty calculations? Or did you simply find a geographical theory that conveniently supported your ambitious plan? It's a fascinating debate as it speaks to your character, a visionary driven by flawed science, or a cunning entrepreneur who knew how to sell a risky venture. Either way, you were pushing against the tide of established navigational wisdom. The Portuguese, with their careful, incremental approach, were slowly building an empire based on accurate charting and proven routes. You, on the other hand, were placing all your chips on a single massive westward gamble. Their success and the sheer scale of their endeavor only highlights how radical, and to many, how utterly foolhardy your own plan seemed at the time. You weren't just proposing a new route. You were proposing a route based on fundamentally different, and as it turned out, incorrect assumptions about the world's geography. So you've got this grand idea, right? This seemingly brilliant, albeit mathematically shaky shortcut to the east. But securing the funding for such an audacious, high-risk venture isn't as easy as, say, getting a venture capitalist to back your quirky new app idea today. You're not just looking for a few gold coins. You're seeking royal patronage, the kind of backing that involves ship's supplies crew and a whole lot of political clout. And let's be honest, you've been knocking on doors for years, practically a professional royal pest, trying to convince anyone with a crown and a treasury to invest in your westward dream. You started as many ambitious explorers did by approaching the Portuguese. After all, they were the undisputed kings of maritime exploration, at the time flush with success from their African ventures. You presented your calculations, your maps, your unwavering conviction. And they, being the pragmatic and scientifically minded navigators, they were listened, politely took your proposal seriously enough to have their experts review it, and then rather definitively said, "No, thank you." Their Royal Advisory Committee, comprised of some of the best minds in navigation and cartography, looked at your figures for the Earth's circumference, compared them to their own far more accurate estimates, and concluded that your proposed journey was simply too long for a viable trade route, if not outright impossible, given the limitations of 15th century sailing technology. It's like trying to sell a bridge to a bunch of engineers who've already built a perfectly good tunnel. They see the flaws in your design right away. So where do you turn? When the best in the business reject your pitch, you turn to their rivals, of course. And at this particular moment in history, your best bet, arguably your only real shot, lies with Spain. But Spain isn't exactly in its prime. For centuries, the Iberian Peninsula had been fragmented, a patchwork of Christian kingdoms, constantly vying for power, and locked in a centuries-long struggle, the Reconquista, to push the Moorish rulers out of the last stronghold in Granada. This was a drain on resources, a consuming national obsession, and left little spare cash or attention for speculative overseas ventures. However, things are finally shifting. The year is 1492. Yes, that 1492. Just months before you set sail, a momentous event occurred that fundamentally changed the political landscape of Spain, the fall of Granada. King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile, whose marriage had effectively united the two largest kingdoms of Spain, had finally achieved their long-held ambition. The last Moorish stronghold in Iberia had fallen. This mainstream historical fact is absolutely crucial. Suddenly, Spain is unified, triumphant, and perhaps most importantly, no longer preoccupied with an internal war. They have soldiers to re-employ a sense of national destiny and a treasury, however depleted, that is no longer being poured into a grinding siege. Isabella, in particular, is a fascinating figure. She's pious, ambitious, and shrewd. She sees the potential, not just for material wealth, but for spreading Christianity and expanding her kingdom's influence. While Ferdinand might have been more skeptical, focused on the immediate economic gains, Isabella seems to have been swayed by your fervent belief, your grand promises of both gold and souls. You presented your venture not just as a financial investment, but as a crusade, a divine mission to bring Christianity to new lands. This appealed deeply to her religious convictions. It's a bit like someone today pitching a tech startup that promises both massive profits and global salvation. A potent combination, especially if you're a devout monarch. But even then, it wasn't a straightforward yes. You're still haggling, arguing over terms, demanding titles, and a percentage of all future profits that frankly sound preposterous. You want to be admiral of the ocean sea, governor of any lands discovered, and hold a significant share of all trade. The negotiations are drawn out, almost collapsing several times. There's a particularly quirky tidbit here. At one point, you actually packed your bags and began to leave, Granada convinced your demands would never be met. It was only through the intervention of a few key supporters, most notably the royal treasurer Luis de Santangel, who argued passionately to Isabella about the potential riches and the shame of letting such an opportunity slip through their fingers, perhaps even suggesting that France or England might pick it up, that she finally relented. Historians still argue whether Isabella's primary motivation was purely religious zeal or a calculated geopolitical move to catch up with Portugal in the race for global trade routes. Was she genuinely moved by your spiritual vision, or did she simply see a cheap, albeit risky way to bypass Portuguese dominance and secure a slice of the lucrative Asian trade for Spain? It's likely a complex mix of both a convenient alignment of faith ambition and strategic necessity. So in the end, it's not just your persistence or even your flawed geographical theories that win the day. It's a convergence of historical timing, the end of the Reconquista Spain's newfound unity, and a queen willing to take an enormous gamble on a highly improbable dream. You finally have your ships, your crew, and your chance to prove everyone, especially those pesky Portuguese, wrong. Now that you've finally secured your royal backing, the real work begins preparing for a journey into the vast unknown, a journey that will test the limits of human endurance and the fragile technology of the age. You stand on the docks of Palos de la Frontera, a small port town buzzing with the nervous energy of departure. Before you lie your three vessels, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. They sound grand in legend, but let's be honest, they're not exactly luxury liners. If you were setting sail today, you'd probably compare them to slightly oversized fishing boats, not ocean-faring giants. The Niña and Pinta are caravels, sleek and nimble, known for their speed and ability to sail against the wind, thanks to their lateen triangular sails. These were the workhorses of Portuguese exploration, and you're lucky to have them. The Santa Maria, your flagship, is a larger now, or carrack, a slower, heavier cargo vessel. She's sturdier, but a bit like driving a minivan across the ocean when everyone else is in sports cars. You glance at them bobbing gently in the harbor, and you know that your life and the lives of over 90 men depend entirely on their ability to withstand the wrath of the Atlantic. Life aboard these ships is cozy. Imagine cramming roughly 30 to 40 men onto each of these wooden tubs. There are no private cabins for the regular crew. You sleep where you can, often on the deck or wedged between supplies. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale food tar, and bilge water. Personal hygiene is, shall we say, a low priority. A quick splash of seawater is about as good as it gets for a shower. You're all sharing the same limited space, breathing the same air, and getting intimately familiar with each other's less charming habits. Forget your modern concepts of personal space. That's a luxury yet to be invented. It's truly a test of character, patience, and just how much you can tolerate your shipmates snoring. Your diet, as you quickly discover, is a culinary adventure in monotony. Hardtack biscuits, dried salted meat or fish, and a dwindling supply of water are your staples. Fresh food runs out quickly, leading to an inevitable struggle with scurvy, a nasty disease caused by vitamin C deficiency that makes your gums bleed. Your teeth fall out and generally turns you into a miserable, aching mess. You're constantly battling weevils in your biscuits and worrying about the precious freshwater turning stagnant and green. Your daily ration of wine, while welcome, does little to mask the grim reality of your provisions. The navigation system is rudimentary to say the least. You rely on dead reckoning, estimating your position based on your speed direction and the time traveled. You use a compass to track your direction, a sand glass to measure time, and a chip log to estimate speed. At night, you look to the stars, particularly the North Star, to determine your latitude, though this gets tricky as you sail further south. Longitude, however, is a complete mystery. There's no reliable way to calculate it until centuries later. So you're essentially sailing blind in one crucial dimension, relying on your gut feeling and a prayer to keep you on course for Asia. This mainstream historical fact, the lack of accurate longitude calculation, is one of the biggest reasons why finding anything specific in the vast ocean was more luck than precise science. One quirky tidbit about these voyages that often gets overlooked: the constant presence of vermin. Rats and cockroaches are not just passengers. They are integral, albeit unwelcome, members of the crew. They eat your food, spread disease, and generally make life even more unpleasant. Imagine trying to sleep below deck with the constant scuttling of tiny feet and the gnawing sounds of rodents making themselves at home in your dwindling provisions. It's enough to make you wish for a nice clean shark to jump aboard and help thin the population. It's an ecological niche filled by pure desperation. The days blend into weeks and the weeks into months. The routine is endless: standing watch, tending to sails, bailing bilge water, and praying for fair winds. The constant motion of the ship, even in calm seas, is enough to induce a permanent state of seasickness, in some making even the simplest tasks a battle against nausea. The sun beats down mercilessly, or fierce storms erupt without warning, tossing your tiny vessels like toys in a bathtub. Each wave is a reminder of your fragility, each creak of the timbers a whisper of potential disaster. Historians still argue whether the crew's morale was consistently high, or if mutiny was a more frequent, silent threat than often portrayed in romanticized accounts. Was your charisma truly enough to overcome such relentless hardship? Or was sheer fear of failure and the unknown keeping the men in line? As you sail further west, the familiar stars begin to shift and the world feels increasingly alien. You're constantly pushing the limits of your endurance, your faith, and your understanding of the world. You're not just sailing. You're surviving, minute by agonizing minute, day by terrifying day, all for the promise of a shortcut to Asia, a destination that, unbeknownst to you, is still thousands of miles beyond an entire continent that doesn't even exist on your map. You cling to the hope of land, the yearning for solid ground beneath your feet, and the promise of a glorious discovery. The air changes subtly at first, then undeniably. A freshness, a faint scent that isn't just salt and sea drifts on the breeze. You start seeing signs: a floating branch, not waterlogged and ancient, but green and fresh. A tiny bird unlike any you've seen before flitting past the mast. Even clumps of seaweed that don't belong to the open ocean. The tension on board, which has been a palpable grinding weight for weeks, suddenly electrifies the crew. You pace the deck, scanning the horizon, your heart thumping, a desperate rhythm against your ribs. Every speck, every shadow becomes a potential landmass, only to dissolve into the shimmering heat haze. The men are on edge, a mix of desperate hope and simmering frustration. It's like being stuck in the world's slowest traffic jam, knowing your destination is somewhere out there, but you just can't quite see it. Then just after midnight, on October 12th, 1492, a cry shatters the oppressive silence of the endless night. Tierra, tierra, land. The shout rings out from the Pinta, specifically from a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana. You, as Columbus, famously claim you saw a light earlier, but the official reward for the first sighting goes to Rodrigo. It's a mainstream historical fact, the sort of detail that often gets lost in the grand narrative. But imagine the feeling in that moment, the sheer, overwhelming relief, the rush of adrenaline, the release of weeks of pent-up fear and uncertainty, the exhaustion, the hunger, the scurvy. For a fleeting moment, all of it is forgotten. You have done it. You have crossed the vast ocean, and you have found land. You are a hero. As dawn breaks, you finally see it clearly, a small flat island covered in lush green vegetation, fringed by white sands, and surrounded by unbelievably clear turquoise water. Palm trees sway gently in the morning breeze. It's a vision of paradise after the relentless monotony of the open sea. You send a boat ashore carrying the royal standard of Spain and the banner of the expedition. You step onto the sandy beach, feeling the solid ground beneath your feet after 33 days at sea, a sensation that must be pure bliss. You kneel-kiss the earth and formally claim this land for Ferdinand and Isabella, renaming it San Salvador. The indigenous people, the Taino, gather on the shore, watching your arrival with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. And this is where the grand illusion truly solidifies for you, as Columbus are utterly irrevocably convinced that you have arrived in the Indies. You believe this small island is just one of the many outlying islands of Asia, a stepping stone to the mainland. You call the inhabitants Indians, Indios, a name that through sheer monumental error will stick for centuries and be applied to millions across 2 continents. You are so entrenched in your belief, so certain of your geographical calculations, that the idea of an entirely new landmass, a place completely unknown to the European world, simply doesn't compute. It's a bit like ordering a pizza and getting a whole roast chicken delivered, but insisting it's just a really big, strangely shaped pizza. One quirky tidbit. The Taino people who greeted you were largely peaceful. They offered you gifts, including parrots' cotton and small pieces of gold. Your very first written observations note their generosity and innocence. You marvel at their simple adornments and their apparent lack of weapons. This initial encounter, however, quickly devolves. Your immediate focus, the moment you spot those small gold ornaments, shifts from awe to acquisition. The search for gold becomes paramount, the driving force behind all subsequent interactions. You even note in your journal how easily they could be made Christians, for it appeared to me that they had no religion. This casual assessment of an entire spiritual system combined with their openness makes them immediately vulnerable. Historians still argue whether your immediate classification of these islands as the Indies was a genuine stubborn conviction based on flawed science or a deliberate strategic choice to validate your controversial westward route and secure further funding. Did you truly believe you were in Asia? Or did you need to believe it and make everyone else believe it to ensure your legacy and continued patronage? It's a crucial question, because the answer shapes our understanding of your motivations and the immediate consequences of your actions. As you spend the next few days exploring, moving from island to island, you continue to search for the signs of advanced Asian civilizations. The grand cities, the bustling ports, the evidence of powerful monarchs. Instead, you find more small, tranquil islands, more welcoming, but technologically simple peoples, and still only tantalizingly small amounts of gold. You are convinced the wealth is just around the next bend, just on the next island, because in your mind you are in Asia, and Asia is synonymous with unimaginable riches. You are in the wrong place, but at the right time, and you're about to set in motion a chain of events that will reshape the world, all under the grand blinding illusion that you've simply found a better way to the east. You've landed, you've claimed the land, and now you're finally coming face to face with the people who actually live here. This is the moment of first contact, a truly pivotal, albeit deeply misunderstood event. As you step ashore, your boots sinking into the soft sand, you are met by the Taino people. They are to your European eyes remarkable, unburdened by heavy clothes, adorned with simple jewelry, and possessing a gentle, open demeanor. They approach you with curiosity, not hostility, and offer you gifts. Parrots cotton and those tantalizingly small pieces of gold. This immediate generosity and lack of aggression surely surprise you, given the tales of fierce savages, often spun about distant lands. You observe them closely, jotting down your impressions in your journal. They are, you note, well built with good bodies and handsome features. You are particularly struck by their apparent lack of weapons, mentioning that they have no iron. Instead, they carry spears tipped with fish teeth or sharpened reeds. This lack of sophisticated weaponry in your mind signals a crucial vulnerability. You almost immediately conclude that they would make fine servants. This is a mainstream historical fact that highlights the immediate, often chilling transactional nature of European encounters with indigenous populations, the evaluation of their utility and subservience. Their world is one of communal, living, farming, fishing, and a deep connection to their environment. They live in villages of thatched huts, cultivating crops like cassava, sweet potatoes, and maize. Their diet is rich and varied, a stark contrast to the hardtack and salted meat you've endured for weeks. They possess a rich oral tradition, complex social structures, and spiritual beliefs that you, with your European Christian worldview, can barely begin to comprehend, let alone appreciate. To you, their simplicity is a sign of primitivity, not a different way of life. Your conversations, or rather, your attempts at communication, are rudimentary at best. You exchange gestures, pointing to objects, trying to elicit names for things. When you point to the small gold ornaments they wear, their response is to point to other islands, suggesting more gold might be found there. This, you interpret, confirms your belief that you are on the fringes of the great Asian empires where gold is plentiful. You see the Taino as simply residents of these outlying islands, not as part of a vast, distinct culture with its own complex history stretching back thousands of years. You are still convinced you are in the Indies, and these people, therefore, must be Indians. It's a colossal misnomer born of your unshakable geographical delusion. One quirky tidbit that often escapes the general narrative: the Taino practiced a form of ritual ball game similar to Mesoamerican versions played on specially prepared courts. This was not just a sport, but held significant spiritual and ceremonial meaning, a central part of their communal life. Imagine landing on an island and witnessing what looks like a very serious, deeply meaningful game of ancient dodgeball. It's a testament to the richness of their culture, a world you were sadly too preoccupied to truly understand. Historians still argue whether your initial benevolent descriptions of the Taino were genuine reflections of your feelings or a calculated tactic to present these new lands as ripe for easy conquest and conversion to your Spanish patrons. Were you truly charmed by their innocence, or was it merely a strategic observation of their potential for exploitation? This debate touches on the very nature of your character and the imperial mindset of the era. As you spend more time on these islands, your interactions become less about mutual curiosity and more about the relentless pursuit of your primary objectives: gold spices and Christian converts. You begin to impose your will, taking some of the Taino people back to your ships, ostensibly to learn their language and guide you to other islands, but implicitly as captives, as proof of your discoveries. You are not seeing them as equals, but as resources, as subjects for conversion and labor. The initial moment of peaceful contact filled with wonder on both sides quickly gives way to the inexorable march of conquest, driven by your unwavering yet utterly mistaken belief that you have found the outskirts of Asia. The moment you see those first small pieces of gold worn as simple adornments by the Taino, your focus sharpens with an almost feverish intensity. It's no longer just about charting a new route or making grand discoveries. It's about fortune. This is the driving force, the shimmering prize that justifies every hardship, every risk, every agonizing day at sea. You are at heart a man of your time, and for a man of the 15th century, gold is the ultimate measure of success, the currency of power and prestige. You immediately begin to interrogate through gestures and what little communication you can manage where this gold comes from. The Taino, ever accommodating, point to the south to other islands like Hispaniola, which you will later call La Isla Española, or the Spanish island, today shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic and Cuba, indicating that there is more of it there. This to you is irrefutable proof that you are close to the great gold-producing regions of Asia, the fabled mines that supplied the empires of the East. You envision mountains of the stuff rivers running with golden flakes enough to fill the coffers of Spain and secure your own legacy for eternity. It's like finding a single potato chip in the couch cushions and immediately assuming you've stumbled upon a secret underground potato farm. The search for gold quickly becomes an obsession, dictating your movements and interactions. You spend weeks sailing from island to island, always asking, always seeking, always looking for evidence of this precious metal. You establish a pattern land on an island, greet the locals, note their demeanor, exchange trinkets for any gold they might possess, and then inexorably demand to know where the source is. Your journal entries become peppered with observations about gold, its presence, its absence, and the best ways to acquire it. This single-minded pursuit of wealth is a mainstream historical fact that defines the early phase of European engagement with the Americas. It's not about scientific exploration, not about understanding new cultures. It's about resource extraction, pure and simple. You soon discover that the gold is not in fact lying around in vast quantities. It's primarily alluvial gold found in stream beds, collected in small nuggets or flakes. The Taino use it for adornment, not as a primary currency or a symbol of immense wealth in the European sense. They don't have vast mines or elaborate systems for its extraction. This disconnect between your expectation of an Asian gold empire and the reality of small-scale indigenous use creates a growing tension. You are looking for a vast organized industry, and you are finding intricate artisanal craftsmanship. One quirky tidbit during your gold hunt, you become increasingly convinced that you are nearing the lands described by Marco Polo, even though the landscape and people are nothing like his vivid descriptions of China and Japan. You interpret every hint, every vague gesture, as confirmation of your preconceived notions. For instance, you hear the Taino speak of Caniba, which refers to the Carib people, fierce neighbors they often clashed with. You, however, twist this into Caniba, convinced it refers to the Great Khan of China, whose kingdom you are supposedly approaching. It's a classic case of hearing what you want to hear rather than what's actually being said. This selective listening, this desperate desire to fit reality into your pre-existing narrative, becomes a hallmark of your entire journey. Historians still argue whether your escalating demands for gold and the increasingly coercive methods used to obtain it were a direct result of the immense pressure from the Spanish crown to show a financial return, or if it stemmed from a personal avarice that eclipsed your initial missionary zeal. Was it a desperate attempt to justify the immense investment and risk, or did the sight of gold simply ignite a deeper, darker ambition within you? This debate highlights the complex motivations that drove the age of exploration, a blend of piety, curiosity, and naked greed. As the weeks turn into months, your expeditions become more intrusive, your requests for gold more insistent. You even establish a Fort La Navidad on Hispaniola, leaving behind a small garrison of men with strict instructions to find and collect as much gold as possible. You are setting the stage for what will become a brutal history of exploitation, all because you are convinced that this relatively humble island is merely a prelude to the vast gold-laden empires of the East. You are so close, you believe, to hitting the mother lode, to striking it rich in the fabled land of Chipangu, that you can almost taste the shimmering metal. The reality, of course, is that the vast gold and silver mines of the Americas are still unknown to you, lying deep within the heart of continents you don't even know exist. You are digging for gold, but you've only scratched the surface of an entirely new world. As you continue your explorations through the Caribbean, your primary obsession with gold is closely followed by another relentless pursuit, the spices. You are, after all, on a shortcut to the Indies. And what are the Indies famous for, if not their aromatic treasures? Cinnamon cloves, nutmeg, pepper. These aren't just condiments. They are the literal flavors of wealth and power in 15th century Europe. They preserve food mask unpleasant odors and add a much-needed kick to what was, by modern standards, a rather bland diet. A merchant who controlled a reliable source of spices was a very rich merchant indeed. You scan the lush vegetation of the islands, inhaling deeply, searching for those familiar, pungent aromas that would signal a valuable find. You break off branches, crush leaves, and sniff every unfamiliar plant you encounter, convinced that any moment you'll stumble upon a grove of pepper vines or a forest of cinnamon trees. You even try to identify plants that vaguely resemble known spices, engaging in a form of botanical wishful thinking. It's like searching for your favorite coffee shop in a new city, convinced that every building with a sign must be it. The irony, of course, is that while these islands are teeming with unique flora, they are not fundamentally the spice islands of Southeast Asia. The local plants have their own uses and properties known intimately by the Taino people. But they are not the highly prized commodities that fueled European trade. You find cotton, which is useful, and various native fruits, which are delicious but not exportable in the same way as spices. You might occasionally mistake a local root or leaf for a familiar spice, perhaps a type of chili pepper for black pepper, or a fragrant tree bark for cinnamon. But these are fleeting moments of self-deception, quickly followed by the crushing reality that the vast organized spice plantations of the East are nowhere to be found. This stubborn adherence to the spice route fantasy is a mainstream historical fact that underscores your deep-seated conviction that you have reached Asia. Your mental map formed from classical texts and flawed calculations leaves no room for an entirely new continent. Everything you encounter must fit into the existing framework of the known world, even if it requires a significant amount of mental gymnastics. If it's not gold, it must be spices. There's no other reason to be here after all. One quirky tidbit from this period, you encounter a plant that the Taino smoke, a habit completely alien to Europeans at the time. This, of course, is tobacco. You observe them rolling and lighting dried leaves, inhaling the smoke. You even bring some back to Spain, introducing Europe to a habit that would eventually become a global phenomenon. Though at the time, you probably considered it little more than a curious local custom, a novelty that certainly wasn't a valuable spice. It's a remarkable example of how a casual encounter with an indigenous practice could inadvertently unleash a massive cultural and economic shift centuries later, all while you were still sniffing around for a peppercorn. Historians still argue whether your continued insistence on having reached the Indies despite the lack of major spice finds and the obvious cultural differences from Marco Polo's descriptions was a testament to your unwavering faith in your own calculations, or a calculated deception to maintain support from the crown. Did you genuinely believe you were in Asia, or did you have to pretend you were knowing that the promise of spices was key to continued funding and glory? This debate speaks to the psychological complexities of a man caught between his convictions and the mounting evidence of an entirely different reality. You continue to collect samples of plants and even small amounts of what you hope might be spices, carefully labeling them to take back to Spain. You describe them in your journal, often with a hopeful, almost desperate tone, trying to fit them into your preconceived notions of Asian commodities. But deep down, a flicker of doubt must surely exist. Where are the bustling spice markets? Where are the ships laden with pepper and ginger? You find instead small, self-sufficient communities, vibrant ecosystems, and a rich indigenous knowledge of the local plants, none of which align with your grand vision of a swift journey to the opulence of the East. You are constantly in the wrong place, stubbornly searching for the right ingredients, unaware that you are about to harvest something far more significant than any spice, a whole new chapter in human history. Beyond the relentless hunt for gold and the ever-elusive spices, another powerful motivation fuels your journey, a goal that you as Columbus hold with as much fervor as any material wealth, the conversion of souls. You are, after all, a man of profound faith, deeply rooted in the Christian traditions of your era. For you, the voyage westward isn't just an economic venture. It's a sacred mission, a chance to spread the word of God to new uncharted lands. This intertwining of faith and fortune is a hallmark of the age of exploration, a potent blend that justified conquest and exploitation in the eyes of many Europeans. From your very first encounters with the Taino, you observe their customs, their spiritual practices, or what you perceive as a lack thereof. You note their apparent willingness to trade their peaceful nature, and crucially their lack of an organized, familiar religion. In your journal, you often remark on how easily they could be made Christians. This isn't just a casual observation, it's a strategic assessment. You envision legions of new converts swelling the ranks of Christendom, a spiritual harvest that would bring immense glory to God and conveniently to the Spanish crown. It's a very different kind of expansion, but one just as vital to your mission as finding a gold mine. You begin to implement strategies for conversion almost immediately. You instruct your men to treat the indigenous people well, at least initially, to foster goodwill and make them more receptive to your message. You hold masses on the islands, displaying Christian symbols, and attempt to explain the tenets of your faith through gestures and the few words you've managed to pick up. You believe that by showing them the true path, you are saving their souls from eternal damnation. This mainstream historical fact, the explicit goal of religious conversion, is often overlooked in favor of the more tangible pursuits of gold and land. But it was central to the motivations of many explorers and their royal patrons. However, the path to conversion is fraught with miscommunication and ultimately coercion. Your understanding of their beliefs is superficial at best, and your attempts to explain complex theological concepts are bound to be lost in translation. Moreover, the Taino, while peaceful, have their own spiritual systems, their own gods and rituals, which you dismiss as mere superstitions or the work of the devil. You don't see them as having a different religion. You see them as having no religion, making them ripe for your intervention. This fundamentally ethnocentric view sets the stage for a clash of cultures that will have devastating consequences. One quirky tidbit: the Taino believed in spirits called simi, which could be represented by carved figures or idols. When you and your men first encountered these, you likely viewed them as pagan idols, something to be destroyed or replaced. Imagine the confusion and dismay of the Taino as their sacred objects were removed or desecrated, all in the name of a new god they barely understood. It's a stark illustration of how easily cultural misunderstandings can escalate into profound disrespect and destruction. Historians still argue whether the fervent desire for Christian conversion was a genuine expression of your personal piety or a convenient justification for territorial expansion and the subjugation of new populations. Did you truly believe you were doing God's work, or was saving souls a useful moral veneer for the pursuit of power and wealth? It's a complex question, as it highlights the ways in which deeply held religious beliefs could rationalize brutal imperial practices. The two goals, conversion and conquest, often became inextricably linked, forming a powerful ideological framework for colonization. As your presence on the island solidifies, the gentle persuasion quickly gives way to more forceful methods. The Taino are compelled to provide labor to gather gold and to participate in Christian rituals, whether they understand them or not. The concept of freedom as they know it begins to erode under the weight of your perceived divine right. You are laying the groundwork for a colonial system where indigenous populations are seen as subjects to be governed, souls to be saved, and bodies to be exploited. Your journey, begun with such grand illusions of reaching Asia, is now forging a new reality. The expansion of European power, fueled by gold, validated by faith, and built upon the lives of the people you mistakenly called Indians. After weeks of exploration among the islands, collecting samples, making notes, and of course securing what little gold you can, the time eventually comes to turn your ships homeward. You have fulfilled your mission. Or so you believe. You have found a westward route to the Indies. The return journey, however, is often overlooked in the grand narrative. But for you and your crew, it's a terrifying ordeal, perhaps even more perilous than the outward voyage. You are no longer sailing into the unknown. You are sailing through it, relying on your limited understanding of ocean currents and weather patterns. You set sail from Hispaniola in mid-January of 1493, with the Niña and the Pinta in tow. The Santa Maria, your flagship, was lost on Christmas Eve, having run aground on a reef near what is now Haiti. That's a mainstream historical fact that adds a significant layer of stress to your return. One of your precious vessels is gone, and some of your men are left behind in the hastily constructed Fort Navidad. You are literally sailing with fewer resources than you started, and a whole garrison to worry about on your next trip. The Atlantic, which had been relatively kind on the outward journey, decides to exact its toll on the return. You soon encounter a series of violent storms, ferocious gales that batter your small ships, threatening to swallow them whole. The waves are monstrous, rising like mountains, and the wind screams through the rigging, tearing at the sails. You and your crew are constantly bailing water, fighting to keep the ships afloat, the wooden timbers groaning under the immense strain. It's a relentless, terrifying battle for survival, one that makes the earlier fears of falling off a flat Earth seem laughably quaint. The real fear is being dashed to splinters by a rogue wave. During one particularly harrowing storm, the Niña and Pinta are separated. You on the Niña believe the Pinta has been lost, taking with it all your precious evidence and the crew's hard-won proof of your discovery. In a moment of desperation, convinced you might not survive, you famously write a detailed account of your voyage, sealing it in a waxed barrel and casting it into the sea, hoping it would somehow wash ashore and tell the world of your achievement. It's a quirky tidbit, this message in a bottle, a testament to your fierce determination that your legacy, your discovery, would not be lost to the depths. The physical toll on the crew is immense. Weeks at sea mean dwindling provisions, once again constant dampness, and the ever-present threat of scurvy and other diseases. Morale plummets during the storms as the men face the very real prospect of perishing just when they were so close to home. You, however, maintain your composure, perhaps drawing on your deep faith, perhaps driven by an unshakable belief in your destiny. Historians still argue whether your leadership during these storms was genuinely inspiring or simply a desperate act of a man with too much to lose. Was it true courage or the sheer terror of failure driving you forward? Eventually, after enduring unimaginable hardship, you make landfall in the Azores, a Portuguese island chain, out of necessity. This is a potentially tricky situation given the rivalry between Spain and Portugal over Atlantic territories and exploration rights. You're forced to seek refuge, repair your battered ship, and gather supplies. Then another storm pushes you off course, forcing you to make a second unplanned landing in Lisbon, Portugal, right in the backyard of your former benefactors who had rejected your plan. This is a tense encounter. King John II of Portugal initially greets you with suspicion, perhaps even resentment. He knows full well what you claim to have found, and while you insist it's the Indies, he and his advisors, based on their more accurate calculations of the Earth's size, are likely already suspecting something else entirely. The mainstream historical fact is that this stop in Lisbon was a diplomatic tightrope walk as you presented your findings to a king whose own navigators were well on their way to India via Africa. You had to convince him you hadn't infringed on Portuguese territories, which ironically you hadn't because you were in an entirely new world. Against all odds, both the Niña and the Pinta, which had weathered the storm and landed elsewhere in Portugal, eventually make it back to Palos de la Frontera in March of 1493, almost simultaneously. You've returned a survivor, a claimant of a new route, and a herald of what you still believe are the western fringes of Asia. You step onto Spanish soil, exhausted but triumphant, ready to report your world-changing findings to the monarchs who had gambled on your improbable dream. You've returned a battered but triumphant figure, stepping onto the docks of Palos to a hero's welcome. The news of your arrival spreads like wildfire, reaching the Spanish court, which is currently in Barcelona. You are summoned immediately, and this is where the real show begins, reporting your monumental, albeit fundamentally mistaken findings to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. This isn't just a debriefing. It's a performance, a carefully orchestrated presentation designed to justify their immense investment and secure your future endeavors. You arrive in Barcelona in mid-April, less than a month after your return, and the city erupts in celebration. You enter the court in a grand procession, a spectacle carefully designed to impress. Leading the parade are the Indians you brought back, dressed in their native attire, objects of immense curiosity and wonder. Then come the exotic parrots, the samples of gold, small but still gold, the strange plants, and the various artifacts collected from the islands. This public display is a masterful stroke of public relations, generating immense excitement and validating the king and queen's gamble. This mainstream historical fact, the triumphal procession and display of proof, cemented your initial claim in the public imagination. As you stand before the monarchs, you recount your journey with fervor, your voice ringing with conviction. You describe the beautiful islands, the peaceful inhabitants, and of course the promise of immense wealth. You present your evidence, the gold, the plants, the people, and you unequivocally, stubbornly maintain that you have found the western route to the Indies, to the very edge of Asia. You speak of Cipangu and Cathay, convinced that your next voyage will lead directly to the bustling ports and powerful empires that Marco Polo described. You believe you have accomplished the impossible, that you have outflanked the Portuguese and secured a direct line to the riches of the East for Spain. The sovereigns naturally are ecstatic. They bestow upon you the grand titles you demanded: Admiral of the Ocean Sea Viceroy and Governor of the islands you've discovered. You are granted a hereditary nobility, cementing your place in the Spanish aristocracy. The rewards are immense, far beyond what any commoner could usually hope for. For Ferdinand and Isabella, your discovery offers a tantalizing prospect, a chance to rival and perhaps even surpass Portugal in the race for global dominance. It's a geopolitical chess move, and you are their triumphant pawn. However, beneath the surface of triumph, there are subtle undercurrents of skepticism, especially from those who, like the Portuguese, had more accurate understandings of global geography. They listen to your tales, they examine your maps, and they can't quite reconcile your descriptions with the known facts about Asia. One quirky tidbit some learned individuals at court likely raised eyebrows at the absence of any major cities or established trade networks, or the type of advanced civilizations that Marco Polo had described in such detail. Where were the opulent palaces of the Great Khan? Where were the vast populations and the sophisticated technologies? You, of course, dismissed these inconsistencies, arguing that you had merely reached the outlying islands, and the mainland was just a bit further. You were essentially selling a Phase 1 success with promises of even greater riches in Phase 2. Historians still argue whether Ferdinand and Isabella genuinely shared your conviction that you had reached Asia, or if they were pragmatically willing to accept your narrative as long as it opened up new lands for Spanish conquest and resource extraction. Did they truly believe your geographical claims, or did they simply see the strategic advantage of acting as if they did, thereby justifying their claims to these new territories? It's a crucial distinction, as it speaks to the sophisticated political maneuvering at play. Your report, codified in the Capitulaciones de Santa Fe, outlines the terms of your future voyages and the division of spoils. The stage is set for an unprecedented era of exploration and colonization. You are the man of the hour, having seemingly achieved what many deemed impossible. But the grand illusion persists. You have presented a new world, as if it were merely a part of an old one, an oversight that will have profound and lasting consequences for both Europe and the continents you mistakenly labeled the Indies. The celebrations continue, the cheers ring out, but in your mind, you are already planning the next leg of your journey, the one that will finally bring you to the heart of Asia, still blissfully unaware that you are about to set sail for a continent that doesn't even exist on your map. The triumphant return and the lavish reception by the monarchs solidify your status, and before long, preparations for your second voyage are in full swing. This time, there's no struggling for funding. Spain, having tasted the promise of gold and new lands, is eager to capitalize on your discovery. This isn't just an exploratory mission anymore. It's a full-blown colonization effort. You're no longer just sailing with a few small ships. You're commanding a fleet of 17 vessels carrying around 100 to 200 to 500 men, including soldiers, priests, farmers, and even some artisans. Your goal is clear: establish a permanent settlement, convert more natives, and most importantly, find the vast gold deposits that you know must be there. You depart in September 1493, a mere 7 months after your return. This rapid turnaround is a testament to the immense excitement your first voyage generated. The atmosphere is different this time. Less anxious uncertainty, more audacious ambition. You're heading back to what you still firmly believe are the western fringes of Asia, ready to uncover its true riches. You land in the Lesser Antilles, discovering new islands like Dominica and Guadeloupe, before returning to Hispaniola, your primary base. This is a mainstream historical fact. The sheer scale and intent of this second voyage marked a dramatic shift from exploration to colonization. But as you arrive back at Fort Navidad, the scene is grim. The small garrison of men you left behind has been wiped out, killed by the Taino. This is a shock, a brutal reality check that shatters the illusion of perpetual native hospitality. You had envisioned peaceful conversions and easy gold collection. Instead, you find destruction and hostility. The reasons are complex, rooted in the abuses perpetrated by your men, in your absence, their demands for gold and women, and their disregard for local customs. It's a tragic, yet predictable outcome when an unprepared, ill-disciplined group is left to their own devices in a foreign land. Despite this setback, you immediately establish a new, larger settlement called La Isabela, the first permanent European town in the Americas. This is where your true colors as a governor begin to show. And it's not always a pretty picture. You impose a system of tribute on the Taino, demanding a quota of gold from every adult. failure to meet this quota is met with severe punishment. The gentle Indians you first described are now becoming forced laborers. You send hundreds of them back to Spain as slaves, justifying it as a means of Christianizing them and providing labor. This marks a stark and rapid escalation of conflict and exploitation. One quirky tidbit from this period: to aid in your relentless search for gold, you bring horses to the New World on this second voyage. These animals, unknown to the Taino, create immense fear and awe. The sight of a mounted Spaniard appearing as a terrifying composite beast contributes significantly to the early psychological dominance of the Europeans. Imagine living your entire life without ever seeing a horse, then suddenly confronting a warrior on horseback. It would be like us encountering an alien on a six-legged beast today. It certainly made the tribute demands a bit more persuasive. Your geographical delusion, however, remains unshaken. You still believe you are in Asia. You continue to explore the coasts of Cuba, convinced it is the Asian mainland. You force your crew to swear, under threat of severe penalties, that Cuba is indeed part of the continent. You even set off on a new voyage to the south, still searching for the fabled passage to the True Spice Islands. Historians still argue whether your stubborn insistence on Cuba being part of the mainland was a desperate attempt to validate your original thesis for your benefactors back in Spain, or if your conviction was so absolute that it blinded you to all contradictory evidence. Was it intellectual rigidity or political expediency? The realities of governing a new colony, dealing with mutinous colonists, disease, and increasing native resistance prove far more challenging than the glorious adventure you envisioned. Your administration is often chaotic and brutal, leading to discontent among your own men and outright rebellion among the Taino. The gold you find is still not the vast quantities you promised, and the spices remain elusive. You are building a new world, but you are doing so under a grand, stubborn delusion about its true identity, setting the stage for centuries of imperial expansion and the tragic consequences for the indigenous peoples who were so quickly stripped of their freedom and their lands. Despite the growing challenges, the native resistance and the less than stellar gold yields your initial voyages, driven by that powerful geographical error, undeniably set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably alter the course of human history. The legacy of your misconception, the persistent belief that you had found a western route to Asia, shaped the very nature of exploration and colonization for centuries to come. It's a fascinating paradox. The grand illusion enabled the grand discovery. Your reports, despite their inaccuracies, sparked an unprecedented wave of European expansion. The idea of a new world, even if initially seen as merely an extension of the old, ignited the imaginations of monarchs, merchants, and adventurers across the continent. Spain, having taken the initial gamble, now had a perceived head start, and other European powers, Portugal, England, France, and the Netherlands, were quickly galvanized to launch their own expeditions. Everyone wanted a piece of this Indies, even if they weren't entirely sure what it was. This mainstream historical fact, the rapid acceleration of European exploration, is a direct consequence of your initial voyages. The initial mislabeling of the inhabitants as Indians also had a profound and lasting impact. This single error, born of your geographical misconception, became the universal term for the diverse indigenous peoples of two vast continents. It erased their unique identities, their distinct languages, cultures, and nations, lumping them all under a single inaccurate umbrella. This linguistic consequence of your mistake would persist for centuries, demonstrating how deeply ingrained even casual errors can become in the historical narrative. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed between Spain and Portugal in 1494, is a direct example of how your initial voyage and the subsequent claims you made reshaped global geopolitics. This treaty, brokered by the Pope, literally divided the newly discovered and still largely unknown non-Christian world between the two Iberian powers along a meridian line. Portugal received lands to the east, primarily Africa, and the route to India, while Spain received lands to the west, which unbeknownst to them included most of the Americas. It's a quirky tidbit. Two European nations, with the blessing of the Pope, carving up continents they hadn't even fully explored, all based on the premise of your Asian discovery. Imagine negotiating a property deal for houses you've only seen vague blueprints for, and some of which you don't even know exist. The search for a Strait of Anian, a mythical northwest passage, became a dominant theme for subsequent explorers. For centuries after your death, navigators still clung to the belief that somewhere within this new world was a navigable waterway that would lead them directly to the true riches of Asia. This relentless quest for a shortcut, a direct route to the east, drove countless expeditions mapping the coasts of North and South America, precisely because the initial premise that this was Asia was so deeply ingrained. The very geography of the Americas became defined by the European desire to bypass it. Historians still argue whether the long-term consequences of your voyages, particularly the brutal subjugation and decimation of indigenous populations, were an inevitable outcome of European expansionism, or if your specific actions and initial misjudgments set a uniquely destructive precedent. Was the exploitation that followed a product of the era's morality, or did your decisions on the ground actively hasten and intensify it? This debate highlights the complex interplay between individual agency and broader historical forces. Ultimately, the legacy of your misconception is a double-edged sword. On one side, it fueled an incredible age of exploration, expanding the known boundaries of the world and connecting continents that had been separate for millennia. On the other, it initiated a period of immense suffering, exploitation, and cultural destruction for the indigenous peoples who were, in your mind, merely inhabitants of the Indies, waiting to be converted and controlled. Your vision flawed as it was led to a revolutionary shift in human understanding and interaction, laying the groundwork for a truly globalized world, all stemming from the monumental geographical error that there was no continent between Europe and Asia. So you've sailed, you've explored, you've claimed lands and souls, and you've done it all under the unwavering, profound misapprehension that you were merely finding a new path to an old destination. The magnificent irony of your journey, the core of this entire story, lies in the fact that you, Christopher Columbus, stumbled upon an entire hemisphere, two colossal continents by accident. You weren't searching for a new world because the very concept simply didn't exist in your mental framework. You were looking for a shortcut to Asia, and you found something infinitely larger, infinitely more complex, and utterly transformative. This unintended discovery, this monumental geographical surprise, fundamentally reshaped the world. It's a mainstream historical fact that the discovery of the Americas initiated the Columbian Exchange, a vast, unprecedented transfer of plants, animals, culture, human populations including slaves, communicable diseases, and ideas between the Eastern and Western hemispheres. From the Americas came maize potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, and cocoa, revolutionizing European agriculture and diets. From Europe came wheat sugar horses, cattle, and tragically smallpox and other diseases that decimated indigenous populations. This exchange, both beneficial and devastating, is a direct consequence of your accidental encounter with continents you never knew existed. Think about it before 1492. There were no horses in the Americas, no potatoes in Ireland, no tomatoes in Italy. The very fabric of global ecology, economy, and culture was fundamentally altered because you, driven by a flawed map and an unshakable belief, sailed west hoping to find Japan. It's a bit like trying to find a specific restaurant in a new city and accidentally discovering an entire previously unknown megamall that then changes the entire city's layout forever. You didn't mean to, but you did. The sheer scale of this accidental discovery is mind-boggling. You didn't just find an island or two. You opened up two vast continents teeming with millions of people and diverse civilizations that had developed independently for millennia. The Inca, the Maya, the Aztec empires and cultures of immense sophistication were entirely unknown to the European world, until your successors, following the path you blazed, eventually encountered them. Your limited explorations of the Caribbean were just the first ripple in a tidal wave of global interaction. One quirky tidbit about this grand unintended discovery: the name America itself comes from another explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, who, unlike you, eventually realized that these lands were not Asia, but an entirely separate landmass. His published accounts, which explicitly described these lands as a new world, gained widespread popularity, leading a German cartographer, Martin Waldseemüller, to name the newly depicted continent after him in 1507. Imagine being the person who actually found it, but someone else gets to name it. It's the ultimate historical photobomb, really. Historians still argue whether the concept of a new world could have emerged without such a dramatic and accidental encounter. Was the recognition of these lands as distinct inevitable regardless of your specific journey? Or did your unwavering conviction that they were Asia actually delay a more accurate understanding of global geography? This debate speaks to the profound impact of individual perspectives on the unfolding of history. Your story, then, is not just about a journey in the wrong place, but at precisely the right time. It's a tale of human ambition, flawed knowledge, profound courage, and magnificent error. You died still believing you had found a route to the east, still convinced that the lands you discovered were merely the outermost reaches of Asia. You never grasped the true scale of what you had done, the profound shift in human history you had inadvertently initiated. You were a visionary, a man of incredible determination, but also a man utterly, wonderfully, historically mistaken. And so we close our journey through the currents of history, leaving the ships to sway gently on the soft, whispering waves. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with the last hues of the day. As the stars begin to emerge, each a distant sun in its own right. Remember how a single bold journey born of a grand illusion managed to connect worlds and reshape the very fabric of human existence. Let the soft hum of the night embrace you, and the gentle rhythm of the ocean lull you to sleep. Sweet dreams